The last 9 months have been incredibly tough for us as a family. Life as you know it can change in an instant, and we've had to find a way to navigate the stormy waters and road unknown. No press, no announcement, no trace. Yet, inside those guarded palace walls, a royal child had just been born in secret. For months, the world had speculated about Catherine's absence from the spotlight. Her engagements were quietly cancelled, appearances postponed, and photo ops carefully avoided. At first, the silence was chalked up to her recovery from surgery and ongoing health concerns, but those closest to the palace had started to whisper. Something didn't quite add up. Behind closed doors, staff noticed subtle but telling signs: her posture, her clothing choices, her movements, all pointing to something more than a simple recovery. Still, no one dared to ask, not because they didn't suspect, but because they knew better. This wasn't a cover-up. It was a deliberate wall, carefully constructed by two people who had grown weary of the royal machine. There were no leaking aids, no tabloids piecing together clues. This time, Catherine and William had made a choice, not just to keep a secret, but to protect something sacred. There would be no rehearsed photo outside the Lindo wing, no polished royal birth bulletin posted on the palace gates. This wasn't a statement to the press, it was a statement to the institution itself. The pregnancy, confirmed only in hushed tones to a few trusted confidants, progressed quietly. When the moment came, Catherine didn't rush to a camera-lined hospital entrance. Instead, she was escorted to a private wing at St. Mary's Hospital under a veil of secrecy, tighter than anything the firm had managed in decades. The birth was intimate, no fanfare, no photographers, and no formal announcement, but her, William, and a hand-picked medical team sworn to confidentiality. The baby arrived safely, healthy and strong, into a world completely unaware of their existence. There were no gender reveals, no public betting pools, no name speculation, not even the Queen's former press officers had a clue. It was as if the birth had been erased before it even happened. But it wasn't erased. It was protected. This was Catherine's quiet rebellion, not against motherhood or duty, but against the belief that every moment of her life belonged to the public. Her decision wasn't made on impulse. It was the culmination of years, spent under a magnifying glass, where every glance became gossip, and every absence invited assumption. Catherine had given everything, her privacy, her health, her emotional labor to the crown. But this child, this experience, she claimed for herself. And in doing so, she broke a tradition more powerful than protocol, the tradition of royal exposure. It wasn't about hiding, it was about healing. For a woman who had spent over a decade learning how to smile through pressure, this birth was her moment of silence, her declaration that some parts of her life were not for performance, not for cameras, not for the history books. But it wasn't the secret birth that broke royal tradition. It was what Catherine whispered in its aftermath that shook the palace to its core. With a newborn in her arms and no cameras in sight, Catherine said just 4 words, and they echoed louder than any royal address. No press briefing, no carefully written speech, no curated photo release could have matched the weight of what she whispered to Prince William in that private moment. "I can't stand alone." It wasn't just a cry for help, it was a rupture in the palace walls. In that fleeting breath, Catherine, the poised Princess of Wales, stripped away the armor she'd worn for over a decade. Her voice cracked not from weakness, but from exhaustion, and exhaustion built up through years of smiling through pain, attending ceremonies in the midst of chaos, and parenting under the glare of a world that demanded perfection. And this time, it was different. This wasn't a photo-op baby moment to satisfy the press. This was raw, unfiltered humans. At first, the words were never meant to leave that room, but royal secrets rarely stay secrets, especially ones this seismic. Within days, a royal aide, whether out of concern or betrayal, leaked the confession to a tabloid source. The phrase surfaced online in a quiet headline that would soon become a national reckoning. "I can't stand alone," the headline read, but this wasn't gossip, it was gospel. Suddenly, every screen in Britain flashed her words. News anchors repeated them, columnists dissected them, talk shows spun theories, and in an era of outrage, something strange happened. There was no backlash, no criticism, no calls for apology. Instead, the nation froze, because they recognized the voice in O of a duchess or a princess, but of a mother at her breaking point. Across the internet, mothers began sharing their own confessions. Posts poured in from parents who had felt the same isolation, the same weight, the same burning need to say it aloud. They didn't care about crowns or castles. They cared that someone, finally, had said the words they had carried in silence for years. Catherine had become the unexpected voice of the voiceless, not because she planned it, but because she lived it. And her truth shattered one of the monarchy's most powerful illusions. That royal women are made of steel, that motherhood within the palace is free of pain, and that duty is always effortless. Catherine's whisper revealed the cost of composure, the price of silence. Even inside the palace, reactions were immediate. Some senior members were shaken up just by the confession, but by the fact that it had resonated so publicly. For years, the firm had projected an image of serene continuity. Catherine had always played her part. Until now. Her vulnerability wasn't seen as failure, it was seen as leadership. Because in that raw admission, she exposed the cracks beneath the gold trim. The perfection had been a mask, and now the world saw the woman beneath it, a woman stretched thin, a mother overwhelmed, a wife trying to hold together a family in a gilded cage. But instead of being scorned, she was seen. To understand the pain behind those words, we must go back to a young girl from Berkshire, destined for a crown she never asked for. Before the palace gates ever opened for her, Catherine was just a schoolgirl with dreams far from royalty and no idea what awaited her. Born into the kind of life that prized hard work over headlines, Catherine Elizabeth Middleton was raised in a home that never whispered of tiaras or thrones. Her parents, Michael and Carol, built their lives from the ground up, creating a business that gave their children the kind of stability many could only hope for. There was no generational wealth, no blue-blooded legacy, only long hours, strong values, and an unshakable belief in education, discipline, and grace. Catherine absorbed it all, not because she was taught to perform, but because she watched her parents live it. At school, she stood out, not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't. Marlborough College saw a girl who balanced academic achievement with quiet leadership. She didn't speak the loudest, but when she did, people listened. She was athletic, thoughtful, and driven. Yet, beneath her natural charm was a steel core, the kind of inner resolve that didn't need affirmation. It was there, in those early years, that the foundation for something bigger was quietly being laid. Not for fame, not for royalty, but for the kind of resilience few would ever expect she'd need. Then came St. Andrews, the ancient Scottish university, perched on the edge of the sea, and the place where her story would take a dramatic turn. Catherine had chosen to study art history, a decision that seemed ordinary at the time. But nothing about what would come next was ordinary. That's where she met him. William the boy, born into cameras, protocol, and a kingdom that was already waiting for him. At first, they were just two students, two faces in a crowd of bright minds, but something about Catherine made her different. She didn't chase him, she didn't flinch under the weight of his lineage. In fact, when William struggled with the pressure and thought of leaving university, it was Catherine who urged him to stay, not as a girlfriend, not even as a partner, but as a friend who saw the man, not the monarch. Their connection grew quietly, away from flashing bulbs and gossip columns. Catherine didn't demand attention, and that's what made her unforgettable. Their love unfolded in whispers, not headlines. Even when rumors began to circle, they protected their relationship with the kind of determination that would become a theme of Catherine's life. She didn't use her proximity to royalty as leverage. She didn't bend to public curiosity. She chose silence over spectacle, and in that silence, she built something real. There was something rare about her, a stillness in chaos, a strength that never shouted. Catherine wasn't molded for royalty. She wasn't trained for the spotlight, and yet she was already carrying the calm and composure the monarchy had been searching for. Her love story was never just about William. It was about a girl who stayed grounded when the world tried to lift her up too fast. A girl who walked beside a future king but never let the crown define her steps. But when the world finally did notice her, it wasn't love they focused on. It was the pressure to be perfect. Her smile lit up a wedding, watched by billions, but no one saw how heavy the crown already felt. On the 29th of April, 2011, the world stood still as Catherine walked down the aisle of Westminster Abbey, transformed in the public eye from a commoner to the Duchess of Cambridge. The dress, the carriage, the balcony, kiss it all played out like a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't show the toll behind the scenes. While the cameras captured a radiant bride, the reality behind the veil was more sobering. This wasn't just the beginning of a marriage. It was the start of an unrelenting test, one where love and loyalty would constantly collide with protocol and public judgment. Almost overnight, Catherine was thrust into a system steeped in centuries of expectation. Everyone were the days of university, anonymity, and private strolls with William. Every movement, every word, every outfit became public property. And with that exposure came scrutiny. Comparisons to Princess Diana emerged immediately, as if the world had been waiting to cast a new leading lady in the same tragic narrative. But Catherine didn't play the part people expected. She didn't attempt to become Diana. She didn't rebel, nor did she retreat. Instead, she absorbed the pressure quietly, pushing forward with a grace that concealed the growing cracks within. Then came the children, George in 2013, Charlotte in 2015, Louis in 2018. Each birth was met with global celebration, but each also meant more demands, more eyes, more expectations. Catherine faced the impossible task of raising her children under a microscope, expected to be both the perfect royal and the perfect mother simultaneously. The public saw the polished photos outside the hospital, the matching outfits at royal events, the tender moments caught on camera. What they didn't see was the exhaustion, the sleepless nights, the weight of knowing that even her most human moments, her childbirths, her family walks, her parenting choices would be analyzed, praised, or criticized by millions. She worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The invisible labor of royalty meetings, briefings, engagements, and charitable commitments didn't earn headlines, but it shaped the institution. And still, the comparisons to Diana loomed, heavy and relentless. Where Diana had been rebellious and emotionally raw, Catherine was steady and measured, and somehow that too became its own controversy. Critics called her too safe, too quiet, too controlled. As if surviving the relentless pace of royal life with dignity wasn't a feat in itself. Through it all, she balanced on a tightrope between tradition and modernity, public and private, duty and desire. She couldn't afford to stumble, and so she smiled, she waved, she showed up, and the world, wanting so badly to believe in the fantasy, never looked closely enough to see the toll it was taking. Behind that crown was a woman carrying not just the expectations of a nation, but the quiet ache of someone slowly losing herself under the weight of the role. But life behind the palace doors was becoming harder to balance, and Catherine's health soon gave way under the strain. Behind the carefully curated photos and polished events, her body was quietly crying for help. The smile was still there, but it no longer reached her eyes. The waves continued, but they masked a body unraveling beneath tailored dresses and royal posture. In early 2024, the illusion cracked. Suddenly, Catherine vanished from the public eye. Engagements were quietly cancelled. The palace released vague statements about planned procedures. But behind those soft words was something far more serious. An emergency that couldn't be choreographed or delayed. Catherine had been rushed to the London clinic for abdominal surgery. And while the operation itself was deemed successful, what followed was a silence that stirred fear far beyond the palace walls. Weeks passed. Questions mounted. Where was she? Why hadn't she been seen? When would she return? For a woman who had become the monarchy's most reliable figure, her absence echoed louder than any speech. The press speculated, the public whispered, but Catherine said nothing until she had no choice. Then, in a single unguarded moment, the silence shattered. A video, filmed at Windsor, was released in March. No makeup, no royal setting, but Catherine sitting calmly, revealing the words, "No one expected. She had cancer." The confessions struck like thunder. The world paused. Royal fans held their breath. This wasn't just a princess announcing an illness. It was a woman laying herself bare. Her words were calm, but the weight behind them was undeniable. She spoke of shock, fear, of having to process the news privately while also protecting her children. No theatrics, no dramatics. This truth delivered with a grace that made the moment even more devastating. It felt like Diana all over again, not because of the disease, but because of the courage, the vulnerability, the raw humanity in a world that so often demanded perfection. And yet, even in the midst of her illness, Catherine remained composed. She reassured the public, thanks to the doctors, spoke of hope. It wasn't an act. It was her instinct to comfort others, even while fighting a battle inside her own body. As tributes poured in from around the globe, something began to shift. Catherine wasn't just admired now, she was understood. Her years of quiet endurance made sense. The perfect princess had never been untouched by pain. She had simply mastered the art of carrying it with grace. But behind the scenes, the pressure to recover, to protect her children, to reassure the public while facing chemotherapy, was all-consuming. Yet she never retreated. Her role remained intact. She issued statements, oversaw projects, and even appeared briefly with her children for Mother's Day. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her devotion to duty had never been clearer. Her strength is never more evident, and her humanity is never more moving. And just when the world thought they'd seen the hardest part, Catherine had already hidden another truth. While the world worried about her cancer battle, Catherine had already brought a new life into the world completely unseen. No rumors, no leaks, no whispers, loud enough to escape the iron walls of Windsor. In an era where even the smallest royal detail becomes headline fodder, she had pulled off the unthinkable, a royal pregnancy, carried to term without the public ever knowing. There were no blurred paparazzi photos, no sudden changes in wardrobe to analyze, no suspicious disappearances. Every detail had been deliberately hidden, not out of fear, but out of love. This child wasn't being introduced to the world. This child was being protected from it. The decision was not spontaneous. It was planned, calculated, and executed with surgical precision. From the earliest stages, Catherine and William made it clear there would be no press, no official announcement, no carriage rides or waving from hospital steps. Not this time. Even senior members of the royal family were kept in the dark until it was absolutely necessary. This birth didn't follow the rule book, it tore it up entirely. When the time came, she was taken quietly to a private wing where only a select medical team handpicked and vetted for loyalty stood by. William was there. No cameras, no public statements, no hint to the outside world that the line of succession had just quietly expanded. And when the baby arrived, healthy, safe, swaddled in the silence of secrecy, the world remained oblivious. No name, no gender, no weight or length. Nothing, not a single detail slipped, and that silence said more than any royal proclamation ever could. Because this wasn't about hiding, it was about reclaiming something the crown had stolen long ago. The right to be a parent, privately. A right denied to Diana. A right denied to Catherine, for her first 3 children. But not this time. This child would not become a headline. This child would not be paraded, packaged, or politicized. This child would simply be theirs. William took the lead in enforcing the secrecy. He remembered what the cameras had done to his mother. He had watched privacy rot beneath the flash of bulbs and the hunger of tabloids. He wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Not again. Not with this child. For him and for Catherine, the choice was more than emotional. It was symbolic. A declaration that love came before legacy, that some parts of their lives, no matter how royal, would remain sacred. But what made this birth truly monumental wasn't the logistics. It was what it represented. It wasn't just a baby. It was Catherine's quiet rebellion, her decision to say no to tradition, to pressure, to public ownership of her body. After years of giving everything to the institution, this moment was hers, and hers alone. The secrecy wasn't fear, it was power. And in that silence, Catherine reclaimed a piece of herself. The palace had long claimed as theirs. But this birth did more than create life. It uncovered a fracture in the woman the world thought was unshakable. It wasn't just a personal moment. It was a battle cry, and the palace had no choice but to listen. When Catherine's whispered confession, "I can't stand alone," escaped the walls of Windsor, it did more than dominate headlines. It ignited a reckoning. Her vulnerability, once thought to be a rare moment of human weakness, became something far more powerful, a symbol of defiance. Not against duty, but against the suffocating silence that had ruled the monarchy for generations. For decades, royals were expected to smile through pain, to never complain, never explain. But Catherine shattered that unspoken code with just 4 words. And in doing so, she forced the institution to confront something it had long buried: the toll of tradition on the people behind the titles. The palace could no longer remain silent. The leak was real, the public response overwhelming, and the question unavoidable. How much could one woman carry before she broke? And closed doors. Crisis meetings began. Senior aides scrambled. Communications officers were briefed. But this wasn't about damage control. This was about survival. The monarchy had always relied on the image of stoicism. But Catherine's quiet cry had changed the rules. She wasn't being seen as weak, she was being seen as brave. And more dangerously for the firm, she was being seen as real. Inside the royal family, uncomfortable conversations began. For the first time, mental health wasn't being framed as a campaign topic or a polished speech. It was being discussed as a real issue within the palace itself. The very structure of royal life, its isolating protocols, relentless pace, and emotional suppression came under scrutiny. Catherine's moment exposed what many insiders had long known but never dared to say aloud, that the crown could crush its own. And yet, amid the storm, she did not falter. Catherine remained steady, dignified, and unwavering. She never issued a statement. She didn't need to. Her silence now spoke louder than any press release. In the public eye, she became a beacon of emotional honesty. The woman who had given everything, only to finally ask for something in return. support, compassion, understanding. She didn't break protocol. She broke the myth of invincibility, and the people loved her for it. William's response was just as telling. He did not retreat. He stood beside her, not just as a husband, but as a future king unafraid to protect his partner from the very system he was destined to lead. He backed her decision to pull back. He supported her refusal to parade their fourth child. And, most importantly, he began initiating private discussions about the future of the monarchy itself, one that might finally decentralize its responsibilities and distribute its crushing weight. The gates, the public rallied behind Catherine. Support flooded in from every corner of the Commonwealth. Editorials questioned the palace's archaic expectations. Experts called for modernization. The silence that had once protected the crown now seemed like its greatest liability. And Catherine, once a symbol of quiet obedience, had become the voice calling for change. And as the monarchy looked to evolve, it became clear. This wasn't just a ripple. It was a legacy being rewritten. With one private birth and one raw confession, Catherine didn't just mother a child. She mothered a new royal era. What began as a whisper behind palace doors had grown into a movement. No grand declaration was made, no press conference held, yet everything was changing. Slowly, deliberately, William and Catherine were dismantling the age-old scaffolding of royal life, not with rebellion, but with intention. They weren't rejecting the monarchy, they were redefining it. But the center of their vision was something no crown could dictate. Family, not the ceremonial kind shown on balconies, but the real kind, messy, quiet, deeply human. For the first time in modern royal history, duty began to bend to emotion. Catherine and William put their roles on pause, not for public optics, but for personal preservation. The fourth child was being raised differently, quietly, privately, without expectation, without exposure, no staged christenings, no public title debates, no tabloid speculation about a future royal path. This child would not be shaped by duty. This child would be shaped by love. And in that decision, Catherine sent a message louder than any royal address. Her family would not be sacrificed to sustain an outdated system. But the shift wasn't confined to the nursery. Inside the palace, the couple began suggesting new ways to share the burden. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, long seen as secondary, were quietly being considered for more visible roles. It wasn't about status, it was about survival. If the crown was to continue, it couldn't sit solely on a few shoulders. It had to be spread across hands that were willing, not just born into it. This idea, once radical, was gaining quiet momentum, a sign that the royal machine was beginning to soften. Not everyone welcomed the change. Camilla, long a symbol of perseverance and loyalty to the firm, found herself pushed to the edges. Her presence became quieter, her responsibilities fewer. It wasn't hostility, it was evolution. The monarchy was pivoting toward transparency, relatability, and modern identity. And that meant stepping away from rigid hierarchy and the ghosts of scandal. The younger generation wasn't trying to erase the past. They were trying to learn from it. Authenticity became the new currency. No more staged perfection, no more scripted emotion. Catherine and William chose substance over spectacle. Community visits replaced banquets. Meaningful causes replaced ceremonial tradition. And the people noticed. Approval surged not because they were perfect, but because they were real. In an age of disillusionment, their vulnerability felt like truth. The new model was simple. A monarchy that serves, not performs. A family that leads with heart, not heritage. And it was Catherine, the once commoner, the once quiet duchess, who had become its architect. She hadn't taken the throne. She had taken control, not of power, but of purpose. and she had done it without ever raising her voice. But what if all of this every moment had already been quietly planned by a monarch who saw it all coming? Being before the headlines, Queen Elizabeth had already chosen her silent successor, and it wasn't Camilla. While the world debated tradition, tabloid scandals, and modern monarchy reforms, the late queen had been playing a longer, quieter game. Behind palace gates, she had begun grooming someone not just for a crown, but for the future. And that someone was Catherine, not through formal decrees or public favor, but through trust, attention, and an unspoken understanding passed between two women who carried the burden of the crown in different eras. Catherine wasn't just admired by the Queen, she was mentored. Not in front of the cameras, but in private, where power is truly handed down. It started with personal visits, always away from the spotlight. Small, deliberate meetings at Windsor, walk through private gardens, conversations over tea that were never recorded in the court circular. The Queen, known for her distance, allowed Catherine closer than most ever realized. She sent handwritten notes, not protocol, not orders, but advice, thoughtful words on navigating motherhood inside the firm, on protecting oneself without betraying the institution, and on balancing compassion with duty. Elizabeth had seen what the crown could do to a woman, how it isolated, how it demanded silence, and how it rarely forgave vulnerability. She wasn't about to let history repeat itself. Catherine's quiet remark in a closed-door briefing confirmed what many had only speculated. The Queen, long before her passing, had mapped out a vision, and in that vision, Catherine would not merely be a consort, she would be the foundation, not with pomp, but with presence, not with lineage, but with love. Unlike Camilla, whose rise had been hard-earned but contentious, Catherine's path was shaped by patience, humility, and an instinctive connection to the people. Camilla had fulfilled her duties with unwavering formality, but Catherine had forged bonds with children, mothers, communities that transcended titles. It wasn't a contest, it was a contrast, and the Queen knew which one would carry the monarchy into the modern world. Still, it wasn't without consequence. Camilla, who had waited in the shadows for decades, began to feel the quiet displacement. She wasn't being pushed out, but she was no longer at the center. Her public appearances grew fewer. Her statements are less significant. The cameras started to linger longer on Catherine, and not just because of youth or fashion, but because of resonance. Catherine wasn't speaking louder, she was being heard more clearly. And yet Catherine never reached for the crown. She didn't need to. The Queen had already placed it near her, not on her head, but within her reach, through subtle signals, through legacy, through preparation. But Catherine inherited wasn't just admiration, it was responsibility. To take a monarchy steeped in rigid history and lead it with heart, to protect not just the lineage, but the humanity behind it. The Queen didn't train her to perform, she trained her to endure, to evolve. One woman, 4 children, a private birth, a whispered confession, and now a crown waiting quietly in the shadows. Tell us, is Catherine already leading the monarchy into its next chapter? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.